I never thought I'd be sitting here staring into a camera lens, telling strangers about the moment my life shattered like a coffee mug against hardwood floors. But trauma has a way of pushing you into places you never imagined visiting. My name is Margaret Wilson. For 58 years, I lived in the quiet town of Pinewood, Oregon, where maple trees line the streets and everyone still nods hello at the grocery store. I was a third-grade teacher for almost 3 decades at Pine Valley Elementary, until budget cuts left me unemployed at an age when starting over feels impossible. But losing my job wasn't what broke me. It was what happened 3 months ago in my living room on 437 Evergreen Terrace, in the house where I'd raised my son alone, in the house that still held finger-painted masterpieces in dusty boxes in the attic. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because the Great British Bake Off was on, my small indulgence after a morning of sending out job applications that would likely go unanswered. The October light was streaming through the windows, catching dust particles in golden beams across my faded floral couch. I'd made myself a small lunch, tomato soup and half a grilled cheese sandwich, and for just a moment, I felt a whisper of contentment despite everything. The sound of a key in the front door startled me. Tyler rarely visited midweek. At 32, my son had built himself into everything I'd hoped for him. Executive position at Tech Vision Enterprises, home in the nice part of town, beautiful wife and daughter. I'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities I never had, working 2 jobs after his father Richard walked out when Tyler was just 11 months old. Never once did I regret those sacrifices, until that Tuesday. He didn't call out a greeting when he entered. I heard his heavy footsteps on the hardwood, keys tossed roughly onto the entryway table. When he appeared in the living room doorway, I immediately knew something was wrong. His tailored suit was wrinkled, his normally perfectly styled hair disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. But it was his eyes that frightened me, cold, distant, like he was looking at a stranger, not his mother. "Tyler, what are you doing home in the middle of the day? Is everything okay?" I reached for the remote to mute the television. He surveyed the living room, his gaze lingering on the half-eaten sandwich, the television, then finally landing on me with such naked disgust that I physically recoiled. "Is this what you do all day now?" His voice was eerily controlled. "Sit around watching TV while I'm out there working myself to death." The accusation stung. "I applied for 3 jobs this morning, Tyler. The community college, the bookstore downtown, and—" "Save it." He cut me off, stalking further into the room. I noticed then he was carrying a travel mug of coffee, knuckles white around its circumference. "It's been 8 months, Mom. 8 months of excuses. 8 months of, I'm trying, while you sit in this house I'm helping pay for. This wasn't my son. Not the boy who once made me Mother's Day cards with painstaking attention to detail. Not the teenager who defended me fiercely when other kids made comments about his absent father. Something else was happening here. Something I couldn't yet understand. Tyler, honey, what's going on? Is something wrong at work? With Jessica? Talk to me." I stood up, moving toward him, maternal instinct overriding the alarm bells ringing in my head. That's when his face contorted into something unrecognizable. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" His voice rose with each word. "Everything is wrong. I'm drowning here while you're playing victim. Do you know what it's like to carry everyone? To be the only one who takes responsibility?" I froze midway across the room. In 20 years of single motherhood, through poverty and exhaustion and loneliness, I had never once played victim. I'd worked custodial shifts after full days of teaching just to afford his soccer camps and college application fees. I'd gone without new clothes for years so he could have the right brands to fit in at school. The injustice of his accusation rendered me momentarily speechless. My silence seemed to enrage him further. In one fluid, terrible motion, he yanked the lid off his travel mug and flung the contents directly at my face. The coffee was still scalding. Pain bloomed instantly across my cheeks, my eyelids, my lips. I screamed, hands flying up too late to protect myself. The smell of burnt skin and hazelnut coffee blend filled my nostrils as the liquid ran down my neck, soaking into my blouse. Through the pain and shock, I heard his voice, unrecognizable with contempt. "If you don't want to work, Go to the asylum. You're pathetic, a burden. I'm done carrying you. The words hurt more than the burns ever could. I collapsed to my knees, coffee and tears mingling on my face. Through blurred vision, I saw him standing over me, not moving to help, not showing a flicker of remorse. My child, my baby, looking at me like I was nothing. A sound at the door broke the terrible tableau. Gabriela Sanchez, my neighbor for 15 years, stood frozen in the entryway, eyes wide with horror. She'd heard my scream through the open windows and used the spare key I'd given her years ago. "Margaret!" She rushed to my side, then looked up at Tyler. "What have you done? She needs medical attention." "What she needs is a reality check," Tyler said coldly, placing his empty mug deliberately on the coffee table. "Maybe you can talk some sense into her since she won't listen to me." Then he walked out, just like that, left me burning and broken on the floor of the home where I'd kissed his scraped knees and stayed up nights helping with science fair projects. Gabriela helped me to the bathroom, her gentle hands applying cool compresses to my face. "We need to call the police," she insisted, her Mexican accent thickening with emotion. "This is assault, Margaret, your own son or not." "No," I whispered, the word causing pain across my blistering lips. "No police." Even then, I was protecting him. The maternal instinct to shield your child runs so deep that even when they've hurt you unforgivably, it remains. I didn't understand yet what had driven my son to such cruelty. I couldn't comprehend how the sweet boy who once picked wild flowers for my bedside table had become this cold stranger. That night, after Gabriela reluctantly left, I stood in my bathroom staring at my reflection. My face was red and beginning to blister in places. My eyes were swollen from tears and heat damage, but it was the expression in those eyes that caught me. Hollow, devastated, lost. I'd given my entire life to my son. I'd built my existence around ensuring his success and happiness, and in return, he'd shown me exactly how little he valued that sacrifice. Something inside me shifted that night, staring at my damaged reflection. A seed of something darker than I'd ever felt began to take root. They say there's a special kind of madness that comes from having your heart broken by the person you love most in the world. As I gently applied burn cream to my face, I felt that madness blooming inside me. But with it came clarity. The woman who collapsed on that living room floor would never exist again. In her place, something new was forming. Something with edges sharp enough to cut through the lies I didn't yet know were surrounding me. I didn't realize then that the coffee attack wasn't a random explosion of cruelty. I couldn't have known it was actually the first move in a calculated game Tyler had been planning for months. All I knew as I finally lay down in bed, face throbbing with pain, was that something fundamental had broken between us, and that broken things, when put back together, never looked quite the same again. The next morning, I made a decision that would alter the course of everything that followed. I checked myself into Lakeside Mental Health Facility, not because I was having a breakdown, as Tyler had suggested, but because I needed space to think, to heal, to plan. What I didn't expect was who I would meet there, or what I would discover about my son's true motives for wanting me out of the way. Lakeside Mental Health Facility wasn't what I expected. I'd imagined sterile white halls and the smell of disinfectant, patients shuffling around in bathrobes like ghosts. Instead, I found myself in a place that looked more like a rustic lodge retreat. Warm wooden beams across vaulted ceilings, large windows overlooking the actual lake that gave the facility its name, and staff who spoke to you like you were a person, not a diagnosis. I checked myself involuntarily the morning after the coffee incident. My face was still raw and blistering, drawing concerned glances from the intake nurse. When she asked what happened, I told her the truth. My son threw hot coffee at me and told me to go to an asylum. So here I am. The dark humor fell flat even to my own ears. But it was easier than crying again. They gave me a private room with a view of pine trees and the lake beyond. For the first 3 days, I barely left it. I slept, I cried, and I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of Tyler's life, searching for the signs I must have missed. The moments where my sweet boy began transforming into someone capable of such cruelty. Was it when his father left? When he started at that high-pressure job? When he married Jessica, who always seemed to look at me with thinly veiled impatience? On the fourth day, a gentle knock on my door roused me from another spiral of painful memories. A woman with silver-streaked dark hair and kind eyes stood in my doorway. She wore no white coat, just a simple blazer over a blouse, looking more like a university professor than a doctor. "Margaret Wilson, I'm Dr. Olivia Bennett. I was hoping we might talk." I gestured to the chair by the window, assuming she was my assigned therapist. I'd been avoiding group sessions and therapy appointments, but something about her calm presence made resistance feel pointless. "Your face is healing well," she observed, taking a seat. "The redness has faded." I touched my cheek self-consciously. "Aloe vera. My neighbor brought some from her garden before I came here." Dr. Bennett nodded. "Good neighbors are invaluable, especially in times of crisis." She paused, studying me with unusual intensity. "Margaret, I'm not actually a regular staff member here. I'd like to talk to you about your son, Tyler." My breath caught. Had Tyler sent her? Was this some attempt to have me declared incompetent? The paranoia surprised me. I'd never been a suspicious person before. As if reading my thoughts, she reached into her bag and placed an ID badge on the small table between us. It wasn't from Lakeside. It was a federal identification card with her photo and a title, Financial Crimes Investigation Unit. "I don't understand," I whispered, my heart beginning to race. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm not a therapist. I'm an investigator with the government. I've been working on a case involving Tech Vision Enterprises for the past 8 months. She leaned forward. "More specifically, a case involving your son." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the arms of my chair. "There must be some mistake." "I wish there were." Her voice softened. "We have evidence that Tyler has been embezzling from his company significant sums of money over the past 3 years, nearly $2 million. The number hung in the air between us. Impossible, and yet somehow not surprising. It explained so much. The new house in the expensive neighborhood, the luxury car, the lavish gifts he gave Jessica. I'd attributed it all to success and hard work. Foolish, trusting mother. "We believe, Doctor," Bennett continued carefully, "that his attack on you wasn't random. It was calculated." "Calculated?" I repeated numbly. "Tech Vision is conducting a major financial audit next month. Tyler's scheme is about to be discovered. He needs substantial funds to cover his tracks." She hesitated. "Has he been asking you to sign any documents recently? Perhaps regarding your house or finances?" The guardianship papers flashed in my mind. Tyler had brought them over 3 weeks ago, explaining that they were just precautionary given my depression after losing my job. I'd put off signing them, sensing something wasn't right, but unable to pinpoint what. "He wants control of my assets," I said slowly, the pieces clicking into horrible place. "My house is paid off. It's worth maybe $450,000 in today's market." Dr. Bennett nodded. "And with your signature declaring you mentally incompetent, he could leverage it immediately without selling, take out loans, create lines of credit, all while you're safely tucked away in a facility, unable to interfere." The calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. Not just the coffee attack, but the months of subtle manipulation before it. The comments about my concerning behavior, the suggestions that I wasn't handling unemployment well, the offers to help with my finances because I seemed overwhelmed. "I would have signed those papers," I whispered, horrified at how close I'd come to falling into his trap. If he'd just asked nicely, shown concern instead of anger, I would have signed anything to help him. "That's exactly what he was counting on," Dr. Bennett said. "Your maternal instinct to protect him at all costs." I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to process this betrayal that ran so much deeper than I'd imagined. I walked to the window, pressing my palm against the cool glass. Outside, the lake rippled under a light breeze, oblivious to how my world was shattering all over again. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked, not turning around. "Surely you could investigate and arrest him without involving me." I heard her shift in her chair. "We could, but our case would be stronger with your help." Now I did turn. "My help? You want me to help send my own son to prison?" "I want to give you a choice. she corrected gently. You can walk away from this conversation, and we'll continue our investigation without you. Or you can help us understand exactly how he's been manipulating you and potentially others. The choice is entirely yours, Mrs. Wilson. I laughed then, a hollow sound that held no humor. That's the first real choice anyone's offered me in this whole nightmare. I returned to my chair, suddenly feeling more clear-headed than I had in months. Tell me what you need me to do. What followed was 3 hours of the most painful conversation of my life. Dr. Bennett asked for details about Tyler's behavior changes, his financial requests, his unexplained absences and sudden appearances. She recorded everything, occasionally making notes in a small black notebook. I told her about the guardianship papers, about his increasing irritability whenever I mentioned looking for work, about the strange phone calls he'd take in whispered tones when visiting. There's one more thing, I said as our conversation wound down. The thought had been nagging at me, a loose thread I couldn't quite place. Last week, before the incident, Tyler mentioned his father had called him Doctor. Bennett's eyebrows rose slightly. Your ex-husband. I thought he wasn't in the picture. He hasn't been. Not since Tyler was a baby. I twisted my hands in my lap. Richard left when Tyler was 11 months old. No child support, no birthday cards, nothing for over 30 years. Then suddenly last week, Tyler mentioned casually that Dad called. I was so shocked I didn't even question it, but now I'm wondering if the timing is suspicious. Dr. Bennett finished for me. It certainly could be. Do you know if they've actually been in contact? I shook my head. Tyler changed the subject when I asked, but it seems strange that his long-lost father would reappear right when Tyler needs a large sum of money. Dr. Bennett made another note. We'll look into it. Richard Wilson, correct? Richard Conrad Wilson, I confirmed. Last I heard, he was somewhere in Arizona. As Dr. Bennett packed up her notebook, she paused. Mrs. Wilson, what we're asking you to consider isn't easy. If you agree to help us, you'll need to return home and pretend nothing has changed. You'll need to appear vulnerable, even compliant. It could be emotionally difficult, the understatement of the century. Return to the house where my son had attacked me. Pretend I didn't know he was planning to rob me of everything. Act the part of the fragile, manipulable mother. I was a drama club advisor for 15 years at Pine Valley Elementary, I said with a grim smile. I think I can play the role. That evening, alone in my room, I made the decision that would change everything. I would help the investigation, not out of vengeance, though God knows there was a part of me that burned for it, but because somewhere beneath the pain and betrayal was the faint hope that understanding the full truth might eventually lead to healing, for me, if not for Tyler. The next 3 weeks at Lakeside took on a surreal quality. Officially, I was there recovering from emotional distress and anxiety. I attended group therapy sessions where I spoke vaguely about family troubles. I met with the actual facility psychiatrist who prescribed mild anti-anxiety medication that I accepted but didn't always take. All the while, I was secretly meeting with Dr. Bennett and sometimes other agents, planning what would happen when I returned home. Tyler visited twice. Each time, I had to fight the urge to scream at him, to demand how he could do this to his own mother. Instead, I played my part, appearing subdued, slightly confused, grateful for his concern. I noticed how he studied my reactions when he mentioned the house, how his eyes calculated rather than connected. How had I never seen this side of him before? During his second visit, he brought the guardianship papers again. Just to make things easier, Mom, he said, his voice honeyed with false concern. So I can help manage things while you focus on getting better. I signed them with a slightly trembling hand, not from fear, but from the effort of containing my rage. Dr. Bennett had assured me the signatures were meaningless. They documented everything and had legal countermeasures in place. Still, writing my name on those papers felt like a betrayal of myself. The day I was discharged from Lakeside, Tyler came to collect me. He'd brought Sarah, my 8-year-old granddaughter, presumably to make it harder for me to confront him about anything. Sarah bounced around my room, chattering about school and her new ballet class, while Tyler efficiently packed my meager belongings. Ready to go home, Mom? He asked, that same calculated concern in his voice. Home. The word stuck in my throat. The house on Evergreen Terrace had been my sanctuary for 30 years. Now it felt like a stage set for the darkest performance of my life. Yes, I managed. I'm ready. The drive back to Pinewood was tense, despite Sarah's cheerful presence in the back seat. Tyler kept glancing at me, perhaps checking if the facility had fixed me to his satisfaction. I deliberately kept my gaze out the window, watching familiar landmarks pass by. The old mill, the town square with its Victorian gazebo, the elementary school where I'd taught for so many years, places that held the ghosts of happier times. When we pulled into my driveway, Gabriela was waiting on her porch next door. She hurried over as Tyler helped me from the car, her eyes anxiously searching my face. "Margaret, welcome home." She hugged me tightly, whispering in my ear, "Are you truly okay? Do you want me to stay?" "I'm fine," I whispered back, giving her a meaningful look we'd practiced. Gabriela was the only person outside the investigation who knew what was really happening. Her role as my confidant and witness was crucial to the plan. That first night back was the hardest. After Tyler and Sarah left, promising to check on me tomorrow, I walked through each room of my house feeling like a stranger. In the living room, I could still see the phantom stain on the carpet where I'd collapsed. In the kitchen, I found Tyler had replaced my coffee maker with a fancier model, a strange, almost apologetic gesture that made me laugh bitterly. I slept fitfully, waking from nightmares, where Tyler's face morphed into Richard's and back again. The resemblance between them had never bothered me before. Now it seemed like an omen I should have heeded. The next morning, my phone rang early. It was Dr. Bennett. "We found something," she said without preamble. "Your ex-husband isn't in Arizona anymore. He's been in Pinewood for the past month, staying at the Pine Ridge Motel under an assumed name, and he's met with Tyler at least 6 times. The final piece clicked into place. "They're working together," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "After all these years of absence, Richard shows up just when Tyler needs a co-conspirator." "It appears so," Dr. Bennett confirmed. "We've recorded several of their conversations. They're planning to take everything, Margaret. Not just your house, but your retirement fund, even the small trust your parents left you." I sank into a kitchen chair, 30 years of bottled anger toward Richard finally finding a focus. When do we stop them? We need more concrete evidence of their plan. Tyler's embezzlement is well documented, but this conspiracy with your ex-husband is still developing. She paused. "Can you keep up the act a little longer? We're getting close." Could I? Could I continue to smile at my son, knowing he was plotting with his father to destroy me? Could I pretend not to notice the calculated way they were isolating me from friends, from resources, from my own sense of reality? The alternative was letting them get away with it, letting Tyler continue down this path of destruction, letting Richard once again escape responsibility for his actions. "Yes," I said firmly, "I can do it, for as long as it takes." And so began the strangest, most painful performance of my life. For the next 2 months, I played the role of fragile, gradually improving Margaret. I took the medications Tyler insisted on. Dr. Bennett had them analyzed. They were indeed what my prescription called for, though often unnecessary. I agreed when Tyler suggested I wasn't ready to reconnect with former colleagues. I pretended not to notice when documents disappeared from my home office. All the while, I was secretly meeting with federal investigators, recording conversations, documenting every manipulation. I learned that Tyler's embezzlement had begun 3 years ago, with small amounts that gradually increased as his confidence grew. I discovered that Richard had actually reached out to Tyler nearly a year earlier, sensing an opportunity in his son's growing financial desperation. Most painfully, I learned that my son had been siphoning money from my own accounts for months, small amounts I'd attributed to bank fees or forgetfulness. The betrayal was so comprehensive, so methodically executed, that some days I wondered if I'd ever truly known my child at all. The hardest part was maintaining the act around Sarah. My granddaughter visited often, her innocent presence like a knife to my heart. She loved her father unconditionally, just as I once had. How would she survive the fallout from what was coming? The thought kept me awake at night, almost made me call off the whole investigation more than once. But then I would remember Tyler's face as he threw that coffee, the cold calculation behind the rage. I would think of Richard, who had abandoned his infant son without a backward glance, now suddenly playing the concerned father to help steal what remained of my life, and my resolve would harden again. It was Tyler who ultimately accelerated our timeline. 2 months after my return home, he announced he wanted to host a family healing dinner at my house. Just family and a few close friends, he insisted, to celebrate your recovery and new beginning. Dr. Bennett was immediately suspicious. This could be the culmination of their plan, she warned during one of our covert meetings in Gabriela's basement. They may be planning to have you sign final documents or to officially establish your incapacity in front of witnesses. Then let's use it, I suggested, a plan forming in my mind. Let's make this dinner the stage for our final act instead of theirs. And so we prepared for what would become the most dramatic confrontation of my life. Federal agents posing as my new friends from therapy would attend. Recording devices would be hidden throughout my home. Every detail was meticulously planned. The night before this fateful dinner, I stood alone in my bedroom staring at my reflection. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the broken figure who had checked into Lakeside 3 months earlier. My face had healed completely. My eyes were clear and determined. I had lost weight, but gained something far more valuable: clarity. "You've got this, Margaret," I whispered to my reflection. "Tomorrow you take back your life." Little did I know just how completely that life would transform in the 24 hours to come. The morning of the dinner arrived with an unseasonable warmth for Oregon in January. Sunlight streamed through my kitchen windows as I methodically prepared the meal Tyler had suggested, his childhood favorites of pot roast, scalloped potatoes, and apple pie. My hands moved on autopilot, chopping, seasoning, measuring, while my mind rehearsed every possible scenario for the evening ahead. "Doctor," Bennett called shortly after 9. "Everything is in place," she said, her voice steady but tense. "The agents will arrive at 6:30, posing as your friends from the support group. Remember, they'll be wearing small recording devices, but we've also placed microphones in the dining room and living room." "And if something goes wrong?" I asked, sliding the roast into the oven. "Signal word is chamomile. Use it in a sentence if you feel unsafe or want us to intervene immediately. Otherwise, let the dinner play out naturally until we give you the cue." After we hung up, I stood motionless in the center of my kitchen, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we were about to do. In a few hours, I would confront the 2 men who had shaped my life, the husband who had abandoned me, and the son I had sacrificed everything for. Both had betrayed me in ways I still struggled to comprehend. At precisely 5 o'clock, my doorbell rang. Smoothing my hands over the pale blue dress I'd chosen deliberately, Tyler's favorite color from his childhood, I opened the door to find Gabriela carrying a dish of her famous flan. "For dessert," she said with a meaningful look, "though I suspect this evening will be sweet enough without it." Behind her public role as my neighbor and friend, Gabriela had become an unofficial part of the investigation, her house serving as our secure meeting location. Her own history, fleeing an abusive husband in Mexico 20 years ago, had made her a fierce ally in my corner. "Is everything?" she whispered as I took the dessert. "In place," I confirmed quietly. "Are you sure you want to be here for this? It could get ugly." She squared her shoulders. "Margaret, when my Diego raised his hand to me the 3rd time, I ran away. I've always wondered what would have happened if I had stood my ground instead. I wouldn't miss this for the world." Tyler arrived at 5:30 with Jessica and Sarah in tow. Jessica looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting around my house as if searching for signs of the instability Tyler had no doubt described to her. Sarah bounded in with the beautiful obliviousness of childhood, proudly showing me the new bracelet her father had bought her. "It's real silver, Grandma," she exclaimed, holding up her wrist. More stolen money, I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I admired the bracelet appropriately and sent her to help Gabriela arrange flowers for the table. Tyler inspected me with that clinical gaze I'd grown to recognize. "You look better, Mom. The blue suits you." "I remember how you always loved this color," I said, the words tasting like ash. "You had that blue bicycle you rode everywhere." Something flickered across his face. perhaps a genuine memory of happier times. Before the mask slipped back into place, I invited Dad. I hope that's okay. I think it's time we all made peace with the past. As if on cue, the doorbell rang again. I steeled myself before opening it, knowing who would be standing there. Richard Conrad Wilson had aged well, damn him. At 62, his hair had silvered attractively at the temples, and he'd maintained the trim physique that had first attracted me 35 years ago. Only the lines around his eyes and the slight softening beneath his jaw revealed the passage of decades since he'd walked out on us. "Margaret," he said, his voice carrying that same charming southern cadence I'd once found irresistible. "You look wonderful." "Richard," I replied neutrally. "It's been a long time." "Too long," he agreed with practiced sincerity. "I can't tell you how sorry I am for everything." I stepped aside to let him enter, fighting the urge to slam the door on his perfect, penitent face. The absolute gall of this man, to stand on my porch spouting apologies after 30 years of silence, all while conspiring to take what little I had left. Dr. Bennett's therapy friends, actually Agents Powell and Martinez, arrived precisely on schedule. I introduced them around, watching Tyler and Richard exchange subtle glances when they thought I wasn't looking. They were clearly uncomfortable with these unexpected additions to their carefully planned evening. Dinner began with an artificial pleasantness that made my skin crawl. Richard charmed everyone with stories of his successful real estate business in Phoenix. Tyler spoke animatedly about projects at work, the same work where he'd been systematically stealing millions. Jessica contributed little beyond tight smiles and occasional comments about Sarah's school activities. Sarah, bless her innocent heart, chattered happily, oblivious to the currents of tension flowing beneath the surface pleasantries. "So, Margaret," Richard said as I served the apple pie, "Tyler tells me you've been having a difficult time lately, but you seem to be doing much better now." The opening gambit. I'd been waiting for it. "I am," I replied, sliding into the role we'd rehearsed. "Though some days are still confusing. The medication helps." Tyler jumped in immediately. "Which reminds me, Mom, did you take your evening dose? You know Dr. Whitman was very specific about keeping a strict schedule." There was no Dr. Whitman. The fabricated psychiatrist existed only in the elaborate narrative Tyler had constructed to establish my supposed mental decline. "Oh, I forgot." I touched my forehead in feigned distress. "Everything gets so muddled sometimes." "I'll get them," Tyler offered, already rising from his seat. "The blue pills, right? In the kitchen cabinet?" "Actually," I said, "I think I moved them to my bedroom." The morning light in the kitchen was bothering my eyes. Tyler paused, momentarily thrown by this deviation from his script. "I'll find them," he insisted, heading toward the stairs. As soon as he was out of earshot, Richard leaned forward. "You know, Margaret, Tyler and I have been talking. We're concerned about you living alone in this big house. All these stairs, so much maintenance." "It is a lot," I agreed, playing along. "But this house holds so many memories." "Memories are important," Agent Martinez interjected smoothly, right on cue. "But so is practical support." Richard shot her an annoyed glance before regaining his composure. "Exactly. Which is why we've been exploring some options that might make things easier for everyone." Tyler returned, a small pharmacy bottle in hand. "Found them," he announced, shaking out 2 pills and placing them beside my water glass. I noticed with grim amusement that he'd actually gone to the trouble of filling a prescription for harmless vitamins to maintain his charade. I obediently swallowed the pills, then turned to Richard. "You were saying something about options?" Tyler and Richard exchanged another glance. It was Tyler who continued. "Mom, we've been thinking that it might make sense to reorganize some things. Financially, I mean." His voice had the practiced smoothness of a sales pitch. "Dad has some excellent investment opportunities through his firm, and with the house as collateral, we could generate a really comfortable income stream for you." And there it was. The trap laid bare. "The house as collateral," I repeated, wide-eyed with feigned naivety. "But what if something went wrong with the investments?" "Nothing will go wrong," Richard assured me, his confidence absolute. "I've been managing these portfolios for years. The returns are guaranteed." Agent Powell raised an eyebrow. Guaranteed returns? That's unusual in today's market. Richard's smile tightened. Figure of speech. Let's just say they're extremely reliable. It sounds complicated, I said, furrowing my brow. Maybe we should discuss it another time, when I'm more clear-headed. Actually, Tyler interjected, I took the liberty of having the papers drawn up already. He reached for his briefcase. Everything's explained very simply, and since I already have guardianship, we can handle most of it. You just need to sign in a few places. The moment was approaching. I glanced at the agents, who gave me imperceptible nods. It was time. Before we get to that, I said, rising from my chair, I'd like to propose a toast. I lifted my water glass. To family and to truth. Something in my tone must have shifted because Tyler froze, hands still on his briefcase. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. I've been doing a lot of thinking during my recovery, I continued, moving to stand at the head of the table. About family, about trust, about the people we believe we know. The room had gone very still. Even Sarah sensed the change in atmosphere, her small face turning serious as she looked between the adults. Tyler, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, would you like to tell everyone what you've really been doing at Tech Vision for the past 3 years? Or should I? His face drained of color. Mom, you're confused again. Let me get you another... I'm not confused, Tyler. Not anymore. I turned to Richard. And Richard, would you care to explain why you suddenly reappeared in our lives after 30 years? Was it fatherly concern? Or did you smell money? Margaret, Richard began, his charm offensive, kicking into high gear. You're clearly upset. Perhaps we should stop pretending, I cut him off. Agent Powell, Agent Martinez, I believe this is your cue. The two therapy friends stood, producing their badges. Tyler Wilson, Richard Wilson, Agent Powell announced formally. We need to ask you some questions regarding financial irregularities at Tech Vision Enterprises and a conspiracy to commit fraud. The chaos that erupted was almost theatrical. Tyler lunged for the door but found it blocked by 2 additional agents who had been stationed outside. Richard attempted to claim ignorance, insisting he was just here for a family dinner. Jessica began crying, clutching Sarah protectively. Gabriella moved quietly to comfort them both, guiding them toward the kitchen and away from the unfolding scene. Through it all, I remained standing at the head of my table, watching 30 years of lies crumble in minutes. When the initial shock subsided, Agent Powell addressed the room. We have documented evidence of embezzlement totaling $1.87 million from Tech Vision Enterprises. We also have recorded conversations between Tyler and Richard Wilson planning to defraud Margaret Wilson of her property and assets. Tyler's face had transformed from shock to a cold fury I recognized from the day of the coffee incident. You set me up, he said, staring at me with naked hatred. Your own son. You set yourself up, I replied, my voice surprisingly calm. The moment you decided I was worth more to you as a victim than as a mother. What followed was a blur of formal statements, evidence presentations, and legal terminology. The agents explained they had been tracking the money trail for months, documenting every transaction, recording key conversations. Tyler's embezzlement scheme had been sophisticated but not impenetrable. Richard's involvement had begun as advisory, but evolved into active conspiracy once he realized the potential payoff. As the agents prepared to take them to the station for formal questioning, I asked for a moment alone with my son. The agents hesitated but agreed, stationing themselves just outside the living room door. Tyler sat rigidly on the sofa, handcuffed and seething. I took the chair across from him, suddenly exhausted by the weight of everything that had transpired. Why? I asked simply, the question that had haunted me for months. He stared at me, his father's eyes in his face. You wouldn't understand. Try me. After everything, don't I deserve at least that? Something shifted in his expression. Not remorse, exactly, but perhaps resignation. It started small, company expense accounts, padded invoices. No one noticed, so it got easier. Then bigger. When the audit was announced, he shrugged. I needed a solution, and that solution was to destroy me. It wasn't personal, he said, as if that made it better somehow. Just practical. The house would cover most of what I needed. Dad had connections who could liquidate assets quickly. Not personal, I repeated incredulously. You threw coffee in my face, Tyler. You called me crazy. You tried to have me declared incompetent. How is that not personal?" He looked away. "I needed you to be unstable enough that no one would question the guardianship. It escalated." The clinical detachment in his voice chilled me more than anger would have. This wasn't a son who had made a terrible mistake. This was a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. "What happened to you?" I whispered, grief washing over me anew. "Where is the boy I raised?" For just a moment, something like doubt flickered across his face. Then it hardened again. "That boy was raised on sacrifice and struggle because you chose pride over practicality. Dad offered to come back, you know, when I was 5. He had money by then, could have made our lives easier. You refused." The revelation knocked the breath from me. There was never any offer to come back." "That's not what he told me." Tyler's smile was cold. "Funny how we all have our versions of the truth, isn't it?" Before I could respond, the agents returned to escort him out. As they led him away, he turned back once. "Sarah's going to grow up with her father in prison. I hope your revenge was worth that." The words were designed to wound, and they did. But they also reinforced what I already knew. Tyler would take no responsibility, would twist this until somehow he was the victim. After they left, I sat alone in my living room amid the wreckage of dinner plates and shattered illusions. Gabriella had taken Jessica and Sarah to her home, offering them sanctuary from the media that would inevitably descend once the story broke. The house felt cavernous, echoing with 30 years of memories now tainted by doubt. Had Richard really offered to come back? Had I unwittingly deprived Tyler of a father out of my own stubborn pride? The seed of doubt Tyler had planted threatened to unravel everything. But then I remembered the years of silence, the missed child support payments, the birthdays without even a card. I remembered how I'd sent photos to Richard's parents, hoping they'd reach him, only to have them returned unopened. Whatever story Richard had fed Tyler was just another manipulation designed to justify their conspiracy by painting me as the villain. As dawn broke over Pinewood, I made tea in my kitchen and faced the first day of my new reality. My son was facing criminal charges. My granddaughter's life was forever altered. The comfortable anonymity of my small-town existence was about to be shattered by scandal. Yet beneath the pain and uncertainty, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. The weight of Tyler's manipulation, of Richard's lies had been lifted. Whatever happened next would be on my terms, not theirs. I lifted my teacup in a solitary toast. "To truth," I whispered to the empty room, however painful it may be. Little did I know that this was only the beginning of my transformation, and that the most unexpected chapter of my life was yet to be written. The weeks following the arrests unfolded in a surreal blur. Pinewood, with its population of barely 20,000, had never seen a scandal of this magnitude. The local newspaper ran front-page headlines about the Tech Vision embezzlement case for days. My name appeared in print more times than it had in 30 years of teaching. Reporters camped at the end of my driveway until Chief Donovan, an old friend whose children I'd taught, stationed a patrol car outside to keep them at bay. I became something of a recluse, venturing out only when necessary. Each trip to the grocery store turned into a gauntlet of sympathetic looks and hushed whispers that died the moment I approached. Old colleagues and friends called, left messages expressing shock and support, but I rarely answered. What could I say? How do you explain to someone that the child they watched grow up, the boy they cheered at Little League games and applauded at high school graduation, had become a man capable of such calculated cruelty? The legal process ground forward with excruciating slowness. Tyler's initial bail hearing resulted in a $1.5 million bond, which he couldn't meet. Richard, with his connections and resources, managed to post his own substantial bail and promptly returned to Arizona, though he was required to surrender his passport and check in weekly with authorities. Dr. Bennett, Olivia, as she'd asked me to call her now that the formal investigation was concluded, kept me updated on the case's progress. Tech Vision was cooperating fully, their legal team determined to recover as much of the stolen funds as possible. The evidence against Tyler was overwhelming. Transaction records, falsified documents, even emails to offshore accounts. They've offered a plea deal, Olivia informed me during one of her regular visits, about 6 weeks after the arrests. We sat on my back porch, watching early spring rain patter against the awakening garden. Reduced charges in exchange for full cooperation, including testimony against Richard regarding the conspiracy to defraud you. Will he take it? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. She shook her head. His attorney says he's refusing. She hesitated. He's blaming me, I finished for her, claiming I set him up. Yes, though it won't hold water legally. The evidence of his embezzlement predates any investigation by years. I nodded, strangely unsurprised. Tyler had always struggled with accepting responsibility, even as a child. It was a flaw I'd acknowledged but downplayed, making excuses, picking up the pieces behind him. Perhaps that had been my greatest mistake as a mother, loving too much, demanding too little accountability. Have you heard from Jessica? Olivia asked carefully. The question pierced a fresh wound. After that chaotic dinner night, Jessica had taken Sarah and moved in with her parents in Portland. My attempts to contact them had been met with silence until finally, 3 weeks ago, a formal letter had arrived from Jessica's attorney. She's filed for divorce, I said, my voice catching despite my efforts to remain composed. And she's requested that I not attempt to contact Sarah for the time being. Her therapist apparently recommended minimizing connections to the traumatic events while they process everything. Olivia's face softened with genuine sympathy. I'm so sorry, Margaret. That's incredibly painful. She's the only innocent in all of this, I whispered, unable to keep the tears from welling. Sarah, I mean. She's 8 years old and her world has imploded. She doesn't understand why her father is gone, why her mother cries all the time, why her grandmother is suddenly forbidden. I wiped at my eyes angrily. I keep thinking, was there any other way this could have ended? Should I have just let them take everything? And what then? Olivia challenged gently. Tyler's scheme would have collapsed eventually, with or without your involvement. The company audit would have exposed him. The only difference is that you might have been implicated as well, or left truly destitute when it all came crashing down. Logically, I knew she was right, but logic offered little comfort in the dark hours of the night when I lay awake, haunted by Sarah's face the last time I'd seen her, confused and frightened as Gabriela led her away from the chaos. The isolation began taking its toll. Days blended together, distinguished only by which television show I half-watched while staring out the window. Gabriela checked on me daily, bringing food I rarely ate and news from town I barely processed. This isn't healthy, Margaret, she finally said one afternoon, about 2 months after the arrests. You can't hide from the world forever. I'm not hiding, I protested weakly. I'm processing. Processing doesn't mean stopping your life. You need a purpose, something to focus on besides this tragedy. Purpose, the word echoed hollowly. For 30 years, my purpose had been Tyler, raising him, supporting him, believing in him. Even my teaching career had been chosen partly for its family-friendly schedule. Without that anchor, I felt adrift, purposeless. That evening, unable to sleep, I found myself in the spare bedroom that had once been Tyler's. I hadn't entered it since his arrest, but something drew me there in the midnight quiet. The room was a time capsule of his adolescence. Soccer trophies, science fair ribbons, faded posters of bands long since disbanded. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, running my fingers over the navy blue comforter he'd insisted on when he turned 13. Had there been signs, even then? Moments when the path began to twist toward the man he would become? I thought of his childhood, the temper tantrums that lasted longer than they should have, the casual lies about small things, the charm he could turn on and off like a faucet. Traits I'd attributed to Richard's genetic influence, but had believed my love and guidance would overcome. My gaze fell on the bookshelf in the corner, still filled with the books of his youth. Among the adventure novels and sports biographies, a slim volume caught my eye. A battered copy of To Kill a Mockingbird required reading in his freshman English class. I remembered how he'd surprised me by actually enjoying it, how we'd discussed Atticus Finch's moral courage at the dinner table. I pulled the book from the shelf, and a folded paper fluttered to the floor. Unfolding it revealed Tyler's handwriting, a freshman English assignment. Write about a person you admire. He had written about me. My mom teaches 3rd grade, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but I've seen her change kids' lives. He'd written in his 14-year-old scrawl, like this boy Miguel who couldn't read at all, and everyone else gave up on him, but my mom stayed after school with him every day for a whole year. Now he reads better than me, probably. She says everyone deserves someone who won't give up on them. Tears blurred my vision. That boy had existed, the one who noticed kindness, who valued perseverance, who had been proud of his mother's small daily acts of faith in human potential. Somewhere along the way, that boy had gotten lost. Perhaps there was truth in what Tyler had said during our final confrontation, that I had chosen pride over practicality, that my choices had shaped his resentments. But there was also truth in this faded essay, in the values I had tried to instill. I carefully refolded the paper and returned it to the book. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I made a plan for the next day. Morning found me showered, dressed in proper clothes rather than sweatpants, and driving to Pine Valley Elementary School for the first time since my unceremonious layoff nearly a year earlier. The school secretary, Mrs. Harmon, did a double take when I walked in. "Margaret Wilson, goodness, it's good to see you." Her eyes held that same blend of curiosity and sympathy I'd grown accustomed to, but her welcome seemed genuine. "Hello, Dorothy. Is Principal Chen available? I don't have an appointment, but for you, always." She picked up her phone, announced my presence, and moments later ushered me into the familiar office where I'd attended countless staff meetings over the decades. Principal Chen, Helen, had been a new teacher when I was approaching retirement. Now in her early 40s, she ran the school with a combination of efficiency and warmth I'd always admired. "Margaret," she came around her desk to embrace me. "It's so good to see you. How are you holding up?" The question, asked with genuine concern rather than morbid curiosity, nearly undid my composure. "I've been better," I admitted, "but I'm tired of hiding at home, feeling useless." "You could never be useless," she said firmly, gesturing for me to sit. "What brings you here today?" I took a deep breath. "I want to volunteer. Reading intervention specifically. I know you lost funding for the after-school literacy program, and I have 3 decades of experience gathering dust." Helen studied me thoughtfully. "You're sure? People will talk. They already are." "Let them," I said with more conviction than I'd felt in months. "I need to do something that matters. Something that reminds me of who I am beyond recent events." She nodded slowly. "We could certainly use the help. Mrs. Delaney has 28 students this year, at least 8 reading significantly below grade level." She hesitated. "But I need to be direct about something. The school board might have concerns given the publicity around your family situation." The diplomatic phrasing nearly made me laugh. My family situation. Such a tidy euphemism for having raised a criminal who had tried to destroy me. "I understand," I said, "but I'm not asking for employment or payment, just the chance to help some children who need it. If the board objects, I'll accept their decision." Helen's expression softened. "I'll speak with them. In the meantime, why don't you start informally? Mrs. Delaney would welcome an extra pair of hands, even just a few hours a week." And so began my slow re-emergence into the world. 3 afternoons a week, I sat in a corner of Mrs. Delaney's classroom with struggling readers, using the same techniques that had helped Miguel and countless others over my career. The children, blessedly, knew nothing of scandal or betrayal. To them, I was simply Mrs. Wilson, the reading lady, who played word games and praised their smallest progresses. The work was healing in ways therapy could never have been. Each small breakthrough, a child decoding a difficult word, understanding a passage for the first time, reminded me that positive impact was still possible, that my life hadn't ended with Tyler's betrayal. Word spread through Pinewood's efficient small-town grapevine that I was volunteering at the school. The reactions were mixed. Some parents requested their children not work with me, as if criminal tendencies might be contagious. But others made a point of thanking me, of treating me normally when we crossed paths at the grocery store or post office. 3 months into this new routine, Olivia called with news that sent my carefully reconstructed world tilting again. Tyler's trial date has been set, she said without preamble. And there's something else. The prosecutors want you to testify. I gripped the phone tighter. Testify about what? About the psychological and emotional impact of his actions. About the conspiracy to have you declared incompetent. Your testimony would strengthen the case considerably. And if I refuse? The question surprised even me as it left my lips. Olivia paused. That's your right. They have enough evidence to convict without you. But Margaret, may I speak frankly, as a friend rather than an investigator? Please, I think you need this. Not for the prosecution, but for yourself. A chance to speak your truth in public, to reclaim your narrative. After we hung up, I walked to the lake at the edge of town, following the path where I'd once pushed Tyler's stroller, taught him to ride a bike, listened to his teenage troubles. The same path where I'd walked alone countless times in the past months, trying to make sense of how thoroughly my life had unraveled. Testify against my own son. The very thought made me physically ill, yet something in Olivia's words resonated. My truth, my narrative. Throughout this ordeal, others had been defining me as victim, as fool, as mother of a criminal. Perhaps it was time to define myself. That evening, I called Jessica's attorney and requested permission to write a letter to Sarah. To my surprise, permission was granted with the stipulation that the letter would be reviewed by both Jessica and Sarah's therapist before being given to her. I spent days drafting and redrafting those pages, searching for words to explain the inexplicable to an 8-year-old. How do you tell a child that her father did terrible things, but that doesn't erase the love in her memories? How do you promise everything will be okay when you don't believe it yourself? In the end, I kept it simple. I told her I loved her unconditionally, that nothing that had happened was her fault, that families are complicated, but that my door and heart would always be open to her whenever she was ready. I enclosed a small watercolor I'd painted of the lake in springtime, a new hobby I'd taken up to fill the evening hours, and signed it, Your Grandma Always. 2 weeks later, a hand-addressed envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a crayon drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands beside what appeared to be a purple tree. In wobbly handwriting across the bottom, I miss you, Grandma. Love, Sarah. I sat on my porch steps and wept. Not the bitter tears that had become so familiar, but tears of something like hope, a small green shoot pushing through scorched earth. That night I called Olivia. I'll testify, I said when she answered. Not for revenge, for truth, for Sarah. So someday she'll understand that standing up for yourself isn't the same as giving up on someone you love. As I prepared for the trial that would expose our family's darkest secrets to public scrutiny, I realized I was no longer the same woman who had collapsed on her living room floor with coffee burning her face. That woman had defined herself primarily as Tyler's mother, measuring her worth through his success and happiness. The woman I was becoming defined herself differently, through her resilience, through the small daily kindnesses she could offer the world, through her determination to reclaim joy despite unimaginable betrayal. It wasn't the life I had planned or expected, but increasingly, it was a life I could face with dignity. And dignity, I was learning, is sometimes the only victory possible when love itself has been weaponized against you. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. After months of this case expanding to fill every corner of my life, the physical space where justice would be determined seemed inadequate. Just polished wood, fluorescent lighting, and rows of uncomfortable benches. The prosecution team had prepared me extensively for this day, but nothing could truly ready me for the moment the side door opened and Tyler entered, escorted by officers. He'd lost weight. His once immaculate hair had grown out, and stubble shadowed his jaw. The tailored suits he'd once worn had been replaced by a courtroom-appropriate button-down and slacks that somehow made him look younger, more vulnerable. For a fleeting second, I saw echoes of the little boy who'd once skinned his knee on our driveway and looked to me to make everything better. Our eyes met briefly across the room. I searched for some sign of the son I'd known. Remorse, shame, even anger would have been something recognizable. Instead, his gaze held only cold calculation, assessing me as an obstacle rather than a mother. He looked away first. The trial had already been underway for 4 days. The prosecution had methodically laid out the evidence of Tyler's embezzlement, banking records, falsified reports, witness testimony from Tech Vision colleagues. Today was about the second set of charges, the conspiracy to defraud me of my assets and the associated elder abuse charges stemming from the coffee attack and psychological manipulation. Richard had already testified, having accepted a plea deal in exchange for his cooperation. According to Olivia, he'd thrown Tyler under the proverbial bus, claiming he'd merely offered financial advice while his son masterminded the plot. The ultimate betrayal from father to son, mirroring the betrayal from son to mother. The symmetry would have been poetic if it weren't so heartbreaking. When the bailiff called my name, I rose on unsteady legs. The walk to the witness stand felt interminable, every eye in the courtroom tracking my progress. I was acutely aware of the media presence, of the sketch artist rapidly capturing my likeness, of the court reporter poised to transcribe my every word. Most of all, I was aware of Tyler, watching me with that same detached interest, as if I were a character in a film rather than the woman who had given him life. After being sworn in, I settled into the hard wooden chair, straightened my simple navy dress, chosen carefully to project dignity rather than victimhood, and faced the prosecutor, a serious young woman named Vanessa Chen. "Mrs. Wilson, thank you for being here," she began. "I know this isn't easy." I nodded, finding my voice. "It's necessary." She led me through the background first, my teaching career, my history as a single mother, my relationship with Tyler over the years. Then we moved to the events of the past year, my job loss, Tyler's increasing criticism of my unemployment, the gradual escalation of his controlling behavior. "Can you tell the court, in your own words, what happened on October 12th of last year?" Vanessa asked. I took a deep breath and recounted that terrible afternoon, the burning coffee, the cruel words, the collapse on my living room floor. My voice remained steady, though I had to pause occasionally to maintain composure. Throughout my testimony, I kept my gaze directed at Vanessa or the jury, refusing to look at Tyler. I couldn't bear to see that stranger's face while describing the actions of my son. "And what did you do after this incident?" Vanessa continued. "I checked myself into Lakeside Mental Health Facility," I explained. "Not because I was having a breakdown, as Tyler had suggested, but because I needed space to think, to heal physically and emotionally. And it was at Lakeside that you were first contacted by investigators." "Yes, Dr. Bennett. Agent Bennett approached me there. She explained that Tyler was under investigation for embezzlement and that they had reason to believe he was attempting to gain control of my assets to cover up his crimes." The questioning continued as I detailed the following months, the act I'd maintained upon returning home, the discovery of Richard's involvement, the planned dinner that had culminated in their arrests. Throughout, I strived to present facts without editorial comment, though my hands trembled increasingly as the testimony wore on. When Vanessa finished her questioning, Tyler's defense attorney approached. Martin Greaves was exactly what you'd expect from a high-priced defense lawyer, impeccably dressed, aggressively confident, with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Mrs. Wilson," he began smoothly, "first let me say how difficult this must be for you." The false sympathy made my skin crawl, but I merely nodded. "You've described your son as increasingly critical of your unemployment. Isn't it possible he was simply concerned about your financial stability? Concern doesn't manifest as cruelty, Mr. Greaves." He smiled thinly. "Perhaps not, but frustration might. You were unemployed for 8 months, correct? How many job applications had you submitted during that time?" "Objection!" Vanessa called. "Relevance! I'm establishing the defendant's state of mind, Your Honor," Greaves countered. "If Mrs. Wilson was making minimal effort to find employment while her son was supporting her financially, it provides context for his alleged statements." "I'll allow it," the judge ruled. "The witness may answer." I straightened in my chair. "I submitted 73 applications in 8 months, Mr. Greaves. I kept a spreadsheet. I had 3 interviews that didn't lead to offers. At 58, with 30 years at the same school, my options were limited. And for the record, Tyler was not supporting me financially. I owned my home outright, had my teacher's pension, and modest savings. He occasionally brought groceries or paid for dinner out. Greaves looked momentarily discomfited before pressing on. You claim my client was attempting to have you declared mentally incompetent, yet you voluntarily admitted yourself to a mental health facility. Doesn't that suggest there were legitimate concerns about your psychological state? I sought help after experiencing a traumatic assault, I replied evenly. That's not the same as being incompetent. The facility records will show I was diagnosed with situational depression and mild PTSD, not any condition that would justify guardianship. The questioning grew increasingly aggressive as Greaves tried to paint me as emotionally unstable, financially irresponsible, and vindictive toward my ex-husband. Through it all, I forced myself to respond calmly, even when his insinuations made my blood boil. Mrs. Wilson, isn't it true that you harbored resentment toward Richard Wilson for 30 years? That you frequently spoke negatively about him to your son throughout his childhood? I spoke truthfully, I corrected. Richard abandoned us when Tyler was 11 months old. He paid no child support, sent no birthday cards, made no effort to be part of Tyler's life until very recently, when it became financially advantageous to do so. So you admit to biasing your son against his father? I admit to raising my son with an accurate understanding of his circumstances. Greaves shifted tactics. You've participated extensively in the prosecution's case against your own son. Some might find that unusual for a mother. Would you describe yourself as being motivated by vengeance, Mrs. Wilson? I finally allowed myself to look directly at Tyler. Our eyes locked, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I spoke to him rather than about him. I'm motivated by truth, I said quietly. Tyler, I have loved you every day of your life, including today, but love doesn't mean enabling destruction, yours or mine. What you did was wrong, profoundly, unequivocally wrong. Acknowledging that isn't vengeance. It's the only path to whatever healing might still be possible. Tyler's expression flickered, something unreadable passing across his features before the mask slipped back into place. Greaves, visibly annoyed by my departure from the script, quickly redirected with more questions. But the moment had shifted something in the courtroom. I felt it in the jury's attentive posture, in the judge's thoughtful gaze, in my own suddenly steadier hands. When I was finally excused from the stand, I walked past the defense table without looking back. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. I had spoken my truth. The trial continued for another 3 days. I attended each session, sitting quietly in the back row, bearing witness to the systematic dismantling of the facades Tyler and Richard had constructed. Former colleagues testified about discrepancies they'd noticed but hadn't reported. Financial experts detailed the elaborate money trails. The TechVision CEO described his shock and sense of betrayal upon discovering the extent of the embezzlement. On the final day, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with their verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month and remanded Tyler to custody. As the courtroom began to empty, Tyler turned back once, his eyes finding mine across the thinning crowd. For a moment, I thought he might say something, some acknowledgement, perhaps even an apology. Instead, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before the officers led him away. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It wasn't even necessarily remorse, but it was recognition of me, of what had passed between us, of the truth we had finally faced together. It was perhaps the most honest interaction we'd had in years. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. I declined, slipping through the crowd to where Gabriela waited with her car. We drove in silence to the lake, my sanctuary throughout this ordeal, and walked along the shore as the afternoon sun dappled the water with gold. "What happens now?" Gabriela finally asked. I gazed across the lake to the mountains beyond, considering the question. "I don't know," I admitted. "For so long, this case has consumed everything. Now that it's over, not everything is over," she reminded me gently. "Sarah still needs her grandmother. Sarah." My thoughts returned to the crayon drawing now framed on my bedside table. 2 days after the verdict, Jessica had called, our first direct communication in months. "She asks about you," Jessica had said, her voice tentative but not unkind. "Her therapist thinks it might be good for her to have some normalcy, some connection to the family she remembers, not just the scandal she doesn't understand." We'd arranged a supervised visit for the following weekend. Just an afternoon at the park, nothing elaborate. A first small step toward whatever new relationship might be possible. Yes, I agreed, smiling at Gabriela. Sarah needs her grandmother, and I need her. In the following weeks, life began reshaping itself around new contours. Tyler received a 12-year sentence for the embezzlement and conspiracy charges, with possibility of parole after 8 years. Richard, due to his cooperation and lesser charges, received 5 years. The court mandated restitution payments to Tech Vision and to me, though I had no illusions about ever seeing that money. The media attention gradually faded as newer scandals replaced ours in the public consciousness. Pinewood began treating me normally again, or as normally as a small town ever treats anyone touched by notoriety. My volunteer work at the school expanded to include an art program for students who needed creative outlets for complex emotions. Principal Chen jokingly referred to me as her unofficial therapeutic arts coordinator. One rainy afternoon, about 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected letter. The envelope bore the stamp of the state correctional facility where Tyler was serving his sentence. My hands trembled as I opened it, unsure what to expect. Inside was a single page covered in Tyler's familiar handwriting. Mom, I've started therapy here, the real kind, not the manipulative garbage I put you through. My counselor suggested writing to people I've harmed as a first step toward making amends. You're at the top of that list. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. What I did to you was unforgivable. Not just the coffee incident, but the months of gaslighting, the conspiracy with Dad, all of it. There's no excuse. I've tried to find one, believe me. Blame financial pressure, Dad's influence, a broken moral compass. But the truth is simpler and harder. I chose this. Repeatedly, consciously chose to harm the one person who never gave up on me. I think about that English assignment sometimes. The one about a person I admire. I wrote about you. Did you know that? About how you stayed after school to help that kid learn to read. I meant every word I wrote then. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of those values, of the example you set. I don't know if there's any coming back from what I've done. But I'm trying to find my way toward being someone who at least recognizes how far he's fallen. Someone who might, someday, be worthy of having a mother like you. Tyler. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words. It wasn't a magical fix, not by any means. One letter couldn't erase the trauma or rebuild trust shattered so completely. But it was something I hadn't dared hope for, a glimmer of the sun I thought was lost forever. That evening, as spring rain tapped against my windows, I began a response. I wrote about Sarah's progress in first grade reading, about my volunteer work, about the watercolor class I joined. I wrote about my anger and grief, my ongoing therapy, my struggle to reconcile the boy I'd raised with the man he'd become. I wrote about forgiveness, not as something already achieved, but as a process we might both work toward, step by painful step. I didn't know if reconciliation was possible or even advisable. That wasn't a decision I needed to make today. For now, it was enough to acknowledge that healing could take many forms, that endings could also be beginnings, that even the most devastating betrayals need not define the remainder of a life. As I sealed the envelope, I felt a sense of completion unlike anything I'd experienced since that terrible October afternoon. The coffee had burned, the trust had shattered, the family had fractured, but I had survived. More than survived. I had rebuilt, reclaimed, rediscovered parts of myself long surrendered to the all-consuming role of mother. If you don't want to work, go to the asylum, he'd shouted that day. I hadn't gone to an asylum. I'd gone on a journey through trauma and betrayal, through courtrooms and therapy sessions, through grief and rage, and finally, tentatively, toward peace. Not the peace of forgetting or denying, but the harder-earned peace that comes from facing truth and choosing daily to build something new from the wreckage of what was lost. This isn't the ending I would have chosen. But standing here now, looking back at the path that brought me to this moment, I can finally see that it's an ending I can live with and a beginning I'm ready to embrace. It's been 2 years since that October afternoon when a cup of coffee changed everything. 2 years since I discovered my son, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, had been systematically plotting to rob me of my home, my dignity, and my sanity. 2 years of rebuilding a life I never imagined for myself, one where my son serves time in a state correctional facility. My ex-husband who abandoned us finally faced consequences for his actions, and I found strength I never knew I possessed. Many of you have asked how my story ends. The truth is, it doesn't. Life rarely gives us neat conclusions, especially after trauma. Instead, we get continuing chapters, evolving relationships, ongoing healing. But I can tell you where things stand today as I look back on the journey that brought me here. Tyler is now in his 3rd year of a 12-year sentence. Our relationship exists entirely through letters and monthly supervised visits. The conversations are difficult, often painful, but increasingly honest. His therapist tells me he's making progress in accepting responsibility, in understanding the patterns that led to his crimes. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust him again, but I found a way to separate the son I love from the actions I cannot condone. Sarah, my precious granddaughter, is now 10. After months of supervised visits, Jessica eventually allowed me to have Sarah for occasional weekends. We bake cookies in my kitchen, paint watercolors by the lake, and sometimes, when she's ready, talk about her father. I've learned to answer her questions truthfully but gently, to hold space for her confusion and grief without adding my own. She's resilient in that remarkable way children can be, building a life that acknowledges the fractures without being defined by them. Richard serves his shorter sentence in a minimum security facility in Arizona. He's made no attempt to contact me, for which I'm grateful. Some chapters are better left closed. As for me, the woman who once defined herself primarily as Tyler's mother, I've discovered parts of myself long neglected. My volunteer work at Pine Valley Elementary evolved into a paid position, developing art therapy programs for children experiencing trauma. At 60, I became the oldest new hire in the school's history, a distinction that amuses rather than embarrasses me. I still live in my house on Evergreen Terrace, though I've made changes, repainted the living room where the coffee attack happened, converted Tyler's old bedroom into an art studio, planted new flower beds with Gabriella's help. The house no longer feels haunted by betrayal. It's mine again, filled with book club meetings, Sarah's weekend visits, and the quiet contentment of a life reclaimed. The people of Pinewood no longer whisper when I pass. Time has a way of normalizing even the most sensational stories. I'm just Margaret again, the retired teacher who works with troubled kids, takes watercolor classes at the community center, and makes an excellent blueberry pie for the summer festival. The scars remain, of course. I still flinch sometimes when someone raises a coffee mug too quickly. Certain phrases, "you're confused," or "let me help you with that," can trigger a visceral reaction, remnants of the gaslighting I endured. Trust comes harder now, my natural openness tempered by hard-won caution. But there's strength in these scars, a resilience I never knew I possessed until it was tested beyond imagining. The woman who collapsed on her living room floor, coffee burning her face, and her son's cruel words burning deeper, would not recognize the woman I've become, not because trauma changed me, but because surviving it revealed me. If there's anything I've learned from this ordeal, it's that we are more than our worst moments, more than the worst things done to us. Betrayal may break us temporarily, but it need not break us permanently. The pieces can be gathered, rearranged, transformed into something new, not necessarily better or worse, just different, authentic, earned. I've received thousands of messages from viewers of this channel since I first shared my story. Many of you have experienced similar betrayals, from children, spouses, parents, friends. You've written about feeling ashamed, wondering what you did wrong, questioning how you could have been so blind. I recognize those feelings intimately. They were my constant companions for months. But here's what I want you to know, what I wish someone had told me in those darkest days: the capacity to trust, to love unconditionally, to believe the best of others. These are not weaknesses. They are tremendous strengths, even when they leave us vulnerable. The person who betrays such trust bears the moral failure, not the one who gave it. My journey from victim to survivor to thriver wasn't linear. It happened in fits and starts, in therapy sessions and courthouse testimonies, in quiet moments watching the lake and loud moments of righteous anger. It continues even now, with each letter I write to Tyler, each painting I create, each day I choose to embrace joy, despite knowing how quickly it can be shattered. This concludes my story for the Revenge Expected channel, but my life's story continues beyond these videos. If something in my experience has resonated with you, I ask you to take a moment now to subscribe to this channel. Your subscription ensures that stories like mine, stories of betrayal, yes, but more importantly, stories of resilience, continue to reach those who need them most. The comment section below has become a community of support for many viewers. Please add your voice, whether to share your own experience or simply to connect with others who understand this particular kind of pain. Every comment helps this video reach someone else who might be suffering in silence, thinking they're alone in their experience. If you found value in my story, please consider hitting the like button. It's a simple act that helps tremendously with the channel's visibility. And if you're able, please consider supporting Revenge Expected through Super Thanks. This financial contribution helps cover the substantial costs of producing these in-depth, sensitive videos on a daily basis. Your support allows the channel to continue providing a platform for stories that might otherwise go untold. I'd also encourage you to explore the other videos on this channel. Each story is unique, yet there are common threads that connect us all. The shock of betrayal, the struggle to rebuild, the eventual discovery of strengths we never knew we had. There's comfort in knowing others have walked similar paths. Creating these videos has been both challenging and healing. Revisiting the most painful chapter of my life wasn't easy, but knowing it might help even one person feel less alone made every difficult moment worthwhile. The production team spent weeks helping me shape my experiences into something that might serve others, and I'm deeply grateful for their sensitivity and care. Life after betrayal is possible, not just survival, but genuine growth, joy, purpose. If you're in the midst of your own story of betrayal right now, please hear this. You will not always feel as you do today. The pain doesn't disappear completely. How could it? But it transforms. It becomes part of your story rather than the whole of it. Thank you for bearing witness to my journey. Thank you for your comments on previous videos, for sharing your own stories, for creating a community where painful truths can be spoken aloud without shame. Remember to subscribe, comment, and if possible, support through Super Thanks. Together, we're proving that even the most devastating betrayals don't get the final word in our stories. This is Margaret Wilson, signing off from Pinewood, Oregon. Scarred but whole, betrayed but not broken, and surprisingly, imperfectly, gratefully alive to whatever comes next.